Hey, welcome to Other Fathers. This is a podcast that exists to initiate honest conversation around fatherhood. And for this episode, I sat down with my friend and pastor, Skip Heitzig. And in this episode, we talked all about how we as dads can create lasting relationships with our kids, where so many parents begin to develop strained relationships with their adult children. How do we, as fathers, maintain healthy connections to our kids for life? And so this is something I really look up to Skip for. I think he's modeled this so well as long as I've known him. And so without further ado, let's get to the podcast.
You're a man of many talents, film, preaching, teaching. But I really wanted to have a conversation with you today over one specific topic. And it's something fascinating for this podcast. It's all about fatherhood in the sense that I was probably 3 weeks into having my son Wesley. And I was feeding him in the kitchen at like 5 a.m. and he hadn't slept all night. And I was feeding him and he's screaming and crying, and I had work in a few hours. And I was thinking to myself, man, I can't imagine doing this alone. I can't imagine trying to figure this out as a single dad or a dad that didn't know he was going to be a dad, figuring it out on my own. And thankfully, I had a lot of really great guys around me that I could tap into and asking them questions. But then I feel like the Lord began to stir in my heart some kind of platform for other fathers, other dads. And so that's the premise of this podcast titled Other Fathers. And just really tapping into voices from other dads from every walk of life, every area. And just kind of sitting on the sideline, knowing you as long as I have. I've always noticed something about you in relation to your son, Nate, that you guys have this interesting dynamic where you guys are still friends in a way. And I really enjoy that. And so I'd love to kind of pick your brain today on what it means to really maintain that relationship as your kids get older and to really desire that with your child. But I want to ask you, what was your journey into fatherhood like?
Well, Nick, it was slow and resistant. What I mean by that is I got married, Lenny and I were married, and I was interested in being married. I was not interested in being a father. I didn't know much about either of those things. I didn't know anything about being married. I didn't know anything about being a father. All I know is that to be married and a father was more than I could handle right away. So Lenny and I, when we met, we talked about a family, and I think every couple should talk about what the plans are so you have expectations that are stated and you don't go into the relationship blind or misinformed or let down later on. So we did that, and we decided we would wait a few years. We waited 5 years. And the reason we waited 5 years is a number of things. I think, even though I was older than Lenny, I was more immature. I was kind of loose and fancy free as a single guy. I traveled a lot. I did a lot of things like surfing and photography and music and skateboarding and all sorts of fun things. So, up to that point in my life, it all been about me. I got my own career. I went to school. I kind of did my thing. I understand that being married, I understood even then, being married is a step into selflessness. You take a further step into selflessness when you become a parent. Because your world turns away from you to others. And if there's one, then you're working on that relationship and melding yourselves together. If there's two, then you divide yourself even further. If you have 3 and 4 kids, it's like your whole life is devoted then to the family. Everything else enables that. So I knew that going in. So I said to Lenya, let's just be married for a while and get to know each other and learn to love each other and learn about each other. Then once we kind of have that base, then we'll have children. So we waited for 5 years, and Lenny didn't get pregnant easily. She, her body didn't accept it, but she did get pregnant. She had a few miscarriages before Nate and after Nate because we wanted to have more children. But when she got pregnant with Nathan, we were all excited, and But it was, after years of I moved Lenny. She lived in Hawaii. I lived in California.
Yeah.
We're coming to a place we had never been, knew nothing about, didn't even know a person here.
Yeah.
So it's like, we got to get our feet on the ground before we have babies in this environment, right?
Yes.
Plus ministry, right? Ministry is high demand, and I didn't know how high demand it was because I never knew much about that either.
Yeah.
So I'm entering into husbandhood, knew nothing about that.
Yeah.
I'm going to New Mexico, knew nothing about that.
Yeah.
Potential fatherhood, knew nothing about that.
Yeah.
Starting a church, knew nothing about that. So I'm as green as they could be. So it's good to have a partner, but and eventually a family, but we didn't know what that's going to be like, so we wanted to take it slow. That was my journey. That's why I say it was slow and resistant or reluctant.
Yeah.
And even when 5 years is up, it's like, I was dragging my feet because the thought of me bearing responsibility for a baby was like an overwhelming thought.
Yeah.
I'd seen plenty of people do it, but I just couldn't imagine me doing it. I didn't think I could pull that one off.
Yeah.
So, but I remember when she got pregnant, when she was growing, then the excitement grew. I just could not wait to be a father because it's a reality that you have to grasp. And you have 9 months to think about it
Yes.
and get ready for it and read books on it and talk to people about it. So when it came, I was in.
Yes. Yeah. You were ready for it. So you mentioned that you really felt immature in that time. Was that a reality you came to grips quickly with, or in hindsight, now looking back, is that a realization you have?
I realized that I didn't know anything about fatherhood. This is how bad it was. When we planted a church, I was married, obviously.
Yeah.
We came here, and I found a place to have our Sunday morning meeting.
Yeah.
I'm with another guy who was a single guy, but he used to work in children's ministry as a volunteer in California at the church we grew up in. His name was Mark McAllister. And so I came to Mark. I said, Mark, I found a place for us Sunday morning. We're going to meet in a month. I got to sign the contract. He said, that's exciting. What are you going to do for children's ministry? And a blank look came across my face because I had never considered that. I thought, oh, yeah, that's right. I've seen that before when I've gone to church. People bring their kids there. I mean, this is how bad it was. I didn't even, it wasn't on my radar. Now I have to grapple with, what do I do about children's ministry? Who do I get to run that? Mark, why don't you run that? Even though he's a single guy, he ran it.
Yes.
So, we were green. And, so I think I understood how green, immature, not ready I was. But I figure, I did love adventure. So I just thought, I'll look at this as an adventure. I'll learn this. I'll figure this out.
Yeah, just like you figured everything else out with cameras and
you just got to get in and do it, and then you see what works and doesn't. Ask people who are much better at it than you are, and they'll, I find people are very willing to share what they've learned.
Yeah, and you mentioned something that I think is widely felt by anybody in ministry, in realizing how demanding it is on you personally, on your relationships. How did you navigate through that, the demand, the need, even pastorally from people, while trying to figure out and wrestle with being a dad and raising a kid?
Well, Nick, there were a couple things that I learned along the way. Number one, I learned that, yes, there are many demands and expectations, and that it could be the end of me if I try to fulfill all the expectations. So something I've noticed is that pastors often die the death of 1,000 expectations. If there's 100 people in your church, there's at least 1,000 expectations, because everyone has a few expectations of what you should do for them as a pastor. And so I found myself saying yes a lot when I should. The holiest thing to do would be to evaluate and say no more, because I found myself wanting to do what everybody needed and then stretching myself so thin that I wasn't giving much to my wife and eventually wife and son. I saw that happening, that tension. Fortunately, the second thing, though, that I learned was I have a very honest helpmate. Lenny's very honest.
Yeah.
So she would help me through, and she would instruct me, and she wouldn't do it in a way that was demeaning. Like, she wouldn't use you language.
Yeah.
Like, you're a bad husband, you're this and you're that. She always used I language. That's something that our listeners should always keep in mind and learn to say the I communication more than you. I feel left out. I feel disregarded. I feel like you don't care much about us. So now I have to deal with how she feels.
Yeah.
So she led with her feelings, which was very helpful to me.
Yeah.
Because I was insensitive. I never even thought about her feelings. Once she said it, and that's the great thing about her, she is an honest communicator, right? She never hides things.
Yeah.
She's not passive aggressive. She just gets it out.
Yes.
So I'm kind of boneheaded. So when that happens, I can deal with that.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Now I can fix that or deal with it and learn how to manage it. But so I was faced with two things, and they happened to work well together: the expectations of people and an honest wife, which helped me come to a point where I can't say yes to all the expectations of people. I need to say yes to him first, her second, and then them when I have all that sorted out. Do what I can do.
Yeah. So what would you say in being a dad and continuing to be a dad was the easiest time and the hardest time?
Hardest times were, well, you ask easiest first. So the easiest time is when he was a newborn, because he slept all the time.
Yes.
He ate and he slept, and I remember we went to a restaurant for the first time after he was born, and he slept through the whole thing, and I immediately thought, this is pretty easy. I think
What's everybody complaining about?
I can do this, not knowing that there are phases to life.
Yes.
And that phase quickly wears out.
Yeah.
And a little will is developed and exercised, and you learn all about human nature in seeing raw human nature in front of you, exercised every day. So what I thought was easy was short-lived. It's never been easy, but it always has been rewarding. Every little phase of Nate's life I enjoyed.
Yeah.
And, as a photographer, I took pictures of everything.
Yeah.
And I have a picture of him wearing a plant on his head.
Yeah.
When he was learning how to walk, he found it in the hallway, put it on his head, and walked down the hallway to our bedroom. And it was like, that's awesome. We photographed that. And all the little phases of his life, and then people say, well, wait till he's 2. So I waited till he's 2, and I enjoyed that period. Well, wait till he's a adolescent, and then wait till he's a teenager, and I enjoyed that. We enjoyed every little phase of his life, and we got into it.
Yeah.
So
You and Lenny, or you and Nate?
Lenny and I and Nate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Nate was, would always we disciplined him. So I think there were certain times like any kid would say, this is not fun.
Yeah.
But they would look back later on and say that was very helpful.
Yeah.
And then the hardest times were when you feel helpless when your child is sick or going through some ailment they can't tell you about, they can't articulate it. When Nate was a little child and he would experience pain and he couldn't say, I have pain here.
Yeah.
They're just crying.
Yeah.
Or one time we were in another restaurant and he was in a high chair and he was rocking back and forth and he pushed himself over and it was a hardwood floor. Imagine the full weight of the back of his head hitting a floor.
Yeah.
I pick up the chair with Nate. His eyes rolled back in his head and he stopped breathing for a second. I thought I'd lost him.
Yeah.
And
That's real.
And he came to. And those were very difficult times.
Yeah.
Then when they become teenagers and exercise their will over your will or their will over God's will, it's painful to see that. You want to be able to rescue them from that, but you can't. When we told Nate the stove is hot, and then on one occasion he wanted to test it, so it was a red hot oven and he put his hand on it, burned his whole hand with marks everywhere.
Wow.
those are things you have to let happen. You have to allow consequences to happen, because that's the best way to learn life is go through life.
Yeah.
Life has enough obstacles and pain built into the experience of life. That's how people learn. And if you mitigate the circumstances or the consequences, you are disservicing that child. So it was still hard to see that, though, right?
Yeah.
And so he'd make a choice in high school to hang out with a person. It's like, bad choice.
Yeah.
But you let it happen, and they learn from it.
Yeah.
And then you affirm, and you're there for it. So yeah, those were some hard times.
Yeah. And you guys are in an interesting kind of paradigm, because, I mean, if you just read about or hear about the statistics of pastors' kids maintaining their faith, staying in the church, it's almost ghastly. Like
It is.
It's intense. Why do you think that is?
Expectations. People have expectations in the church of what a pastor's child should be like, a pastor's daughter, pastor's son. You should be like this. And I remember early on seeing that, and I fought against it. And then here's another thing. I was out one time with Nate in town. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I'm in line at a store. I'm with Nate, and I said, Nate, this is our time together. Nobody can bother us. We're just going to do what we want. So we're buying some stuff. I'm buying him a toy or whatever.
Yeah.
Somebody
How old was he?
10.
Yeah. Okay.
Somebody sees him in line, me in line, comes up in line at the store and wants counseling, crying.
Oh, man.
And so I'm taking time with her, but I'm trying to, and afterwards we got on the car, and Nate said, Dad, sometimes I hate being with you
Wow.
because everybody else gets you.
Wow.
And so, that was an unavoidable thing, and it happened too frequently. It still happens. People come up to you, but that's okay. So all of that to say, Nate saw firsthand from the front seat of the car what it's like to be a pastor's kid. So I would tell Nate, I told him on that occasion and several times after, Nate, no matter what I'm doing, no matter who I'm with, even if their loved one's dying or they're dying, even if they're crying their eyes out, you can always interrupt that encounter I'm having with them. Always.
Yeah.
And he goes, what do you mean? I said, if I'm in my office and I'm counseling somebody and it's intense, you can barge in anytime you want. You don't even have to knock.
Yeah.
And I tell my secretary, if Nate comes up, let him through at all times.
Yeah.
And he did. He would barge in. And, some people took umbrage to that. And I instructed them and said, he's my son. I have one. I have many different people in this congregation. I have one son, and nobody's going to take his place. So I just sort of laid that law down. And I also learned to tell him that you're the son of the pastor of this church, but you be who you are.
Yeah.
Don't worry about what people think of you. So he was selling like Pokemon cards out here one day, selling them in front of the church.
And this was last week.
Yeah, but it's as if it happened a long time ago.
Yes, right.
So he was selling them when he was a kid, and somebody came up to him and said, what is the pastor's kid selling stuff at the church for? And she came up to me, and I kind of rebuked her, and I told Nate, you keep doing what you're doing, don't give up.
Yeah.
So I'd always have his back, because I've seen the horror stories. I've seen pastors' kids or sons or daughters go by the wayside. Didn't want that to happen. Always wanted there to be fun in our relationship.
Yeah.
And then when it came to what he would choose to do when he grew up, because he always wanted to be like me. Well, he wanted to play guitar, wanted to do photography, wanted to learn this and ride bicycles and motorcycles and all the stuff he does.
Yeah.
And then later on, he said, I think I want to be a pastor as a growing little kid.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's just today. Who knows what it'll be like later. So I never told him that he should be in the ministry.
Yeah.
I tried to get him involved in a lot of different things and let him sort of pick that out. But he'd always come back to it,
Yeah.
and was genuinely gifted and called at it. And that was another whole process. How do you determine that?
Yeah.
So I just didn't let people get in the way of our relationship, and I told him not to let anyone get in the way of our relationship.
Yeah. It sounds like there was very clear boundaries made with the individuals who may wanted to get in the middle, and
Right.
him.
And, he would jump off the stairs on the stage like a lot of
Yeah.
kids do, or
Yeah.
he'd run and on the seats of the thing. I didn't care.
Yeah.
He's a kid. And
Yeah.
people was,
Yeah.
yelling at their kids. I just said, it's just a chair.
I love it. And kids still do that till this day.
They still
Every Wednesday night,
Yeah.
they're just playing tag or doing whatever, and I love
And
that.
don't you want them to grow up thinking, I had fun in my church. I could run
Yes.
around and do stuff
Yes.
instead of they yelled at me all the time I did stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
For you, what was the balance of the freedom and going back to you talking about consequences, letting your kids learn consequences, but still exercising their freedom? Was there at any point you would step in and say, no more of this?
Yeah, I wouldn't let him do whatever he wanted in our house. Just like if a relative was visiting over with an unmarried girlfriend or boyfriend and wanted
Right.
to come and spend a night at our house, I'd say, no, you
Yeah.
can't.
Right?
Why not? It's illegal. I have a son, and we think that's wrong, and we're not going to let it happen. So,
Yeah.
he saw those boundaries go up.
Yeah.
This is our house, and also there's things in our house you don't do in our house, and I don't do in our house. This is sacred.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he learned that, and I think he went through his experimental age
Yeah.
with friends. When he, like, let's say I gave him the freedom to have a BB gun.
Yeah.
That freedom was taken away when his friend, who was a next door neighbor,
Yeah.
came over, and Nate shot him in the temple, and the BB went through the skin and had to be surgically removed
Oh, man.
in the emergency room.
Yeah.
Well, now you not only forfeit the right to
Yeah.
use that gun,
Yeah.
now you have to pay for the emergency room bill out of your allowance. It'll take 6 months for you to do that.
Yeah.
So that's a consequence that, freedom and responsibility go hand in hand. He learned that. That was a mantra he learned growing up.
Yeah.
The more responsible you are with things, the more freedom you have.
Yeah.
If you're irresponsible in an area or with a thing, you have less freedom.
Yeah.
And so you will be rewarded when you do right, and you will be not rewarded or punished
Yeah.
if you do wrong. But then we did these things that Lenya came up with, and they were called I Love Nathan Days. And it was just a day out of the blue where she'd pick him up out of school, and she would say to him, "Hey, Nate, you know what today is?"
Yeah.
"No, what, Mom?"
Yeah.
"It's I Love Nathan Day." Well, what that meant is he could go to the store, pick out any toy he wanted, go to have any activity he wanted,
Yeah.
have anything for dinner he wanted. It was a day all about him. And sometimes she would pull that on him when he was disobedient
Wow.
to show grace,
Huh. Wow.
because grace means undeserved favor.
Yeah.
So we preach about that, but how do you teach that to a child? Well, there was one time when he was really naughty with his cousin, who's also named Lenya. Lenya's sister named her daughter after her sister Lenya.
Yeah.
So Nate and little Lenya were playing together, and they were both just really mean and naughty to each other. So they should have been punished. Lenya took them to the store and treated them lavishly. And it convicted Nathan so much he didn't want to do that bad behavior anymore.
Yeah.
And that's the goodness of God that leads us to repentance. That was a
Yes.
lesson he lived out and saw with his mom.
Yeah. Wow. I almost think like the story of kids like opening their Christmas present before the day, and then the parents allow them like, hey, you opened it, but we love you, and so here you go.
Yeah, right.
Wow. Yeah. And as he transitioned more into adulthood, I witnessed a lot, and even in my own life, I've seen this a lot, the butting of heads of the son with the father. And I've witnessed that in my own life of almost as the independence is growing, there's this resistance between the two males of a household.
Yeah.
And there's probably a ton of psychology behind it. But did you guys ever experience that?
Sure. That's
Yeah.
called individuating, and everybody individuates. And
There you go. You have a word for it.
it's
perfect.
It's a normal response to have. A mother
Yeah.
individuates from a daughter from her mother, a son from his father. Jesus even said a man's enemies will be of his own household. You know, he set a context in which that was normalized, especially if you're a believer. So there are generational differences that exhibit themselves in father and son relationship. My father at some point was stupider than I was, I thought. And then I realized how fast he got smart, you know, as I grew older. and he with his dad, and goes all the way back. That's just generational differences, and music, and every generation says, like, when I was a kid, now it's much worse. That's just, that'll never change. So, we have two wills being exercised. You have to allow the freedom of opinion, discovery, value to be forged. But at the same time, well, as long as you're in this house, you won't do this. So if he would have said, I'd like an earring, you can do anything you want when you're out of this house paying your own rent. I want a tattoo. You can't have one in my house.
Parents were the same way. My parents were the same way.
You can do anything you want when you pay for it and you pay for your rent. So,
do you have any tattoos?
No.
Would you ever get any?
No, because generationally that was not cool. My parents' generation had tattoos.
Really?
They got them in the war, and they got them when they got home from the war. My generation, you go to the beach, and surfers never had tattoos. It was a clean kind of a SoCal environment.
Was it because tattoos were almost associated with war and intensity?
Probably.
Different things?
Just associated with an older generation. You know, guys who drink and go to bars and put heart tattoos on.
Just ride their Harleys.
Whatever. You know, but it wasn't. It wasn't. And when I see somebody in my generation doing it, it's almost like you're trying to be a little too cool and younger than you are. So for me, it's just not my honest reality.
I like that.
But Nate's generation, obviously, he wears them, and it's no big deal. Now, who knows what that'll be like when they're my age and they think, so that sailor I put on there's kind of sagging that. You know what I mean?
He's stretched out a little bit. Right. He's kicking his feet back. So I like that you're talking about generations and the relationship to your dad. How would you summarize your relationship to your father?
Tense. Volatile. My dad was hard, had high values, preached to his kid, held that generation of man. I saw that with.
And what generation would you say that was?
World War II generation. So the generation that produced the baby boom generation. Weren't soft, weren't mushy, weren't, hey, I love you. None of that stuff was important to them, and they didn't really know how to express emotion well or allow emotion well. And you know, my dad demanded. I have a strong work ethic. I work 6 days a week. I get that from him and from my mom. They worked hard. So there are certain things that were good, certain things that were bad, but the relationship with my father was tense. So when I gave my life to Jesus, even though I was raised in a church, the Catholic Church, he took that as an insult.
Really?
Because you're leaving the church we gave you. You're leaving our religion for some new Protestant born-again thing.
You're a rebel.
That it did not go over well at all. And when my brother died at his funeral, after the funeral, my dad was dealing with guilt over my brother's death because he had an even worse relationship with him. Now it's closed. The book's closed. They can't ever reconcile. So he turned his wrath against me and said to me, in front of the family after the funeral, "You're going to hell." Yelled out, "You're going to hell."
Wow.
You know, for what you've done. So at that moment, the Holy Spirit demanded of me a higher level of behavior than was being exhibited by my father, because in a flash, it was like a revelation. The Lord said to me, "You're my son, you're my child." Yes, you're his child, but you're my child. And you know better. He doesn't know any better. He doesn't have what you have. So you need to show the kind of unconditional love to him that I've shown to you.
Wow.
And my dad was yelling at me, and everybody's kind of like, now what?
Yeah.
I walked over to him.
Yeah.
I hugged him. And I started praying out loud in his ear. Lord, reconcile us, heal this relationship. My Father, we all have a broken heart. I just started praying over him out loud with my arms around him. Now, he's hardened and he's not hugging me back.
Yeah.
And at the end, I said amen. And he looked at me and he just didn't know what to say. He said, that was beautiful. And I turned to him and I said, I love you, Dad.
Wow.
You know, he hadn't told me that. He hadn't, since I could ever remember.
I love you.
I love you.
Wow.
I said it to him.
Wow.
And he just looked at me and maybe said thank you. Next time I saw him, I said, I love you.
Wow.
Next time I saw him, I said, I got nothing back.
Yeah.
Eventually, I said, I love you. I went to visit him. I was living in a different place.
Yeah.
I said, Dad, I love you. And he turned to me and said, I love you too, son. So eventually, what I discovered is that love is an unstoppable force that people will either run from or be dissolved by. And it dissolved that hard heart. Eventually, we would say, I love each other all the time.
Wow. And how old were you?
Oh, I was.
How long did that take?
I was in my 20s when Bob died.
Yeah. That was your
And-
brother?
Yeah, Bob. And so I was a Christian. I had been a Christian a few years.
Yeah.
It was right before I met Lenya, so I was dating a different girl that I was really serious about. And Bob died, and then that happened. And so, you know, the Lord said, yeah, if this relationship is ever going to be healed, it's you who have my word, my revelation. You're going to have to be the catalyst.
Yeah. You have the responsibility.
Yeah.
Wow. That's so powerful. And in navigating through becoming a dad, did you struggle at all with saying those words to your son ever? Never?
No, not
Yeah.
at all. Came out easily.
Yeah.
For a couple of reasons. Spiritual transformation takes place.
Yeah.
When you receive God's love and God's grace, you realize it, especially to him who has been forgiven much, loves much. And the kind of lifestyle I lived before, and to be forgiven for it and be
Yeah.
a child of God, it's just like, I have no higher ground, right?
Yeah. Right.
I can't throw stones.
Yeah.
So, plus, generationally, right, when we individuate, we think, I'm never going to be like my dad. And in a good way, I didn't
Yeah.
want to be like that. I wanted
Yes.
to be close and affirming and loving. And
Yeah.
I thought a child can never hear enough of that. Just like a
Yes.
wife can never hear enough of it. You could
Right.
tell your wife, it's not like, well, you know, I told you I loved you when we got married. You know, take
Yeah.
me at my word. I signed the contract. No.
Yeah.
The affirmation has to be continual, continual, and so same with the son. We say, I say to every phone call, love you, I love you, Dad, I love you.
Yeah.
And just we were working on different messages and projects, and
Yeah.
Nate will put his stuff down and goes, I love collaborating with you. We love working together.
Yeah.
But when we work together, it is as I demand a professionalism among him. And so if I'm in an executive meeting, he has to be, and he does,
Yeah.
as professional as everybody else. And he is my son, but he's a coworker at that point.
Yeah.
We're working at a different level.
Yeah.
But we've learned that dance really well, and because he's grown up in the church, he knows at this point nothing's going to really surprise him. He's seen it all.
Yeah.
And the kind of stuff that young pastors learn when they become church planters that are shockers and open their eyes, you know, he was with us when we discovered all that. So he's seen it all.
Yeah.
So for him to step into that role, it's like, I understand people.
Wow.
So he's got a leg up on that.
Yeah. And I love that there's this ongoing communication, it sounds like, between you guys. That there's this ongoing expectation set.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem like a burden that's too heavy for him to bear.
Right.
It's something that you almost assist him in and show him the way before asking him to do it.
Plus, when I look at him, I see him as somebody who brings a lot to the table. So I often ask his advice for things. It's not like, I am full of wisdom, ask me anything you want. I need advice from him. He's quite wise. And I did this with all my youth pastors, whether it was Levi or anybody else, even to this day, it's like, hey, what do you think about this? I'm thinking of doing this, but I want to have young ears go through this. What do you think? And then I'll get a response that's like, now that's good. So I've learned to not just teach him, but I listen to him.
Yeah.
And I think I learn more from him than he learns from me.
Have you ever been told you have a bad idea?
Oh, yeah. That's the magic of being related to somebody, because you learn to be honest in your communication.
Yes.
And he'll come right out just like Lenny would and just say, not a good idea.
Yeah.
And here's why.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we can communicate really quickly. And he doesn't have to worry about, will I say something that'll offend him? He just, hey, Dad.
Yeah.
That's lame.
Yeah. That's what I appreciate about you guys. You're all very upfront.
Yeah.
There's no...
It's true.
You said no passive aggressiveness.
Right.
That is...
So poor Janae, she comes into this family and she sees 3 alphas, right? 3 A-type personalities. How do I navigate these people?
Yes. Straightforward, no punches pulled.
Right.
I love it. Well, as we kind of draw the conversation to a close, is there anything you would give as a tidbit of wisdom? Nothing's answered overnight or in some simple response, but is there any wisdom you would give to anybody who right now feels as if the relationship to their child is long gone? They're maybe in that adult phase, maybe that teenager phase, maybe even in the 2-year-old phase, who knows? But is there anything you would give in departing to them?
I would say, do whatever you can, move heaven and earth if you need to, go to any extreme to get the relationship that's soured right. Nothing is more important. One day you will die, or they will die, and you won't have another chance. And you'll live in regret. And that's never a way to live. That'll cripple you for the rest of your life. And so you're making decisions now, whether it's with a parent or whether you're a parent and you have a child. Humble yourself. Get it right. Go to the extreme.
Yeah.
I had to tell my dad, I love you, I love you, I love you several times for several months before I got any response.
Wow.
Do what it takes.
That probably wasn't easy for you. That probably didn't bolster your ego and pride.
You do it out of obedience, not out of feeling.
Yeah.
So to say I'm wrong, to say I need help in this, to say I haven't figured this out, I'm not good at this, that's powerful for a child to hear a parent say.
Yeah.
That's enabling to a child to grow.
Wow.
When they hear a parent say, yeah, I don't know how to do this. I'm really not good at this. Can you help me? That'll go a long way. You're opening a door then.
Wow.
So I just, again, do whatever it takes, because the alternative is hell on earth, is to live through pain and regret and sorrow, and it's not worth it.
Right. Wow. I'm departing from this with so much.
You're departing
knowledge.
from this. Sounds like a Bible word.
I am.
I'm departing from this.
I'm coming away from this conversation with so many notes in my back pocket of things I need to start instituting now with Wesley, as he's 2 years old almost. And I'm just so grateful for your time. Thank you.
Well, Nick, you're a good father. I've watched you. Wesley has great parents who have been raised by great parents. And so there's a great legacy you're leaving them. But also you're a good leader. You're a good teacher and you're a good leader. I've watched you in your leadership. So you are developing and leaving for Wesley a great gift in a legacy.
Wow. It means the world coming from you. Thank you. Yeah. Well,
God bless you.
God bless you.
No, God bless you. I'm giving you
Do we have the rosary we could do? Well, let's develop some film, yeah?
Okay, let's
All
do
right.
it.
Thanks.
Hey, thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode. If you want to show